Eudaimanya, systems and frameworks to improve habits, mind, and life.
Welcome to Eudaimanya. Today we are taking a deep dive into the source material of The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And really the mission for this deep dive is to decode this behavioral resilience framework, a framework that essentially transforms individual psychology into a financial competitive advantage.
Right, because it is a massive advantage.
Exactly. So, if you're listening to this right now, maybe you're on your commute, maybe you're just walking the dog, chances are you consider yourself a pretty rational, well-informed person.
Yeah, you do your research.
Right. You look at the data. And usually, in most highly complex fields, your outcomes map directly to that kind of intelligence, right? Like formal training. I mean, if you need a heart transplant, you go to the surgeon who spent a decade at a top-tier medical school.
You don't go to the guy sweeping the hospital floors?
No, obviously not. The outcomes in medicine or engineering, they're predictable based on technical skill. But then you step into the world of finance, and suddenly that logic just completely collapses.
It really does.
We are looking at a landscape where incredibly intelligent, highly educated, and well-informed people routinely make financial decisions that just utterly ruin them.
Well, and we have to dismantle this deeply held false belief right from the start, I think. We treat financial success as a hard science. We teach it like physics or, advanced calculus.
Right.
We operate on this assumption that more technical knowledge automatically produces better portfolio management, and it just does not. Financial success is a soft skill.
Yeah.
The whole system breaks down because people enter it expecting this formulaic science only to discover they've basically walked onto a psychological battlefield.
Let's actually ground this in a concrete reality from the text because the contrast is staggering. So consider this guy, Ronald Reed.
Oh, this is a great example.
Right. He was a rural janitor and gas station attendant in Vermont. Like, he chopped firewood for fun, no Ivy League degree, no Wall Street pedigree. But when he died in 2014, he left behind an estate worth $8 million.
$8 million. As a janitor.
Exactly. Now, put him next to someone like Richard Fuscone. Fuscone was a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive. I mean, he understood the complex math of the markets better than almost anyone on earth. Yet he lost absolutely everything in the 2008 crash. He literally had his massive mansions foreclosed on.
Wow.
And it's not just Wall Street executives either. The text mentions this 20-something tech genius who designed a crucial component for Wi-Fi routers, worth millions.
Right. The Wi-Fi guy.
Yeah. But his relationship with money was entirely ego-driven. He used to carry around a stack of $100 bills, literally just to show off to people.
Unbelievable.
And one day, he gave a colleague thousands of dollars in cash to buy gold coins. He and his friends then went to a dock and literally skipped these $1,000 gold coins across the Pacific Ocean. Just for fun.
Just skipping them like rocks?
Like rocks. And, shocker, he eventually went entirely bankrupt.
Well, the absolute ruin of smart people like Fuscone or that tech founder there isn't caused by technical ignorance. Fuscone didn't lose his mansions because he forgot how to calculate an interest rate.
Right.
He lost them through emotional sabotage. The underlying mechanism here is that technical brilliance actually creates a vulnerability. Highly educated professionals are trained to optimize, right? They try to maximize returns, constantly pushing to squeeze out that extra 2% yield. And driven by ego and greed, they leverage themselves to the hilt. They create these incredibly fragile architectures that just shatter the moment conditions are no longer perfect.
And that fragility brings us to the very first pillar, the foundation of this entire behavioral framework, which is survival.
Yeah.
Before you can win the game, you have to ensure you don't get knocked off the board. But to survive financially, you have to adopt a mindset that is almost a cognitive paradox.
It really is.
You have to simultaneously synchronize long-term optimism with short-term paranoia. Like, think about what that demands of you. You have to genuinely believe the macro future will be better while obsessively guarding against the localized disasters that will inevitably happen between now and that future.
Right. And the mechanism to handle that paradox is what the text calls the margin of safety.
Yes.
It's essentially room for error. And it operates as a substitute both mathematically and psychologically for accurate forecasting. You don't need to know exactly when a recession will hit if your system is already built to absorb one whenever it arrives.
To put an analogy to it, think about engineering a bridge. You don't build a bridge designed to hold exactly 10,000 pounds just because 10,000 pounds is the maximum expected traffic on a random Tuesday.
Right. That would be a disaster.
Exactly. You build it to hold 50,000 pounds, not because you expect 50,000 pounds of cars, but because you can't predict an earthquake or a freak pileup or a massive storm. And holding a large portion of cash in a portfolio during a roaring bull market that is the steel reinforcement in that bridge. It feels objectively foolish in the moment. You know? When your stocks are returning 10% and your cash is sitting there earning barely 1%, that 9% gap just gnaws at you every single day.
Oh, the FOMO is intensely physical.
It really is. But the mechanical purpose of that cash isn't to generate yield. Its purpose is to prevent a desperate, ill-timed stock sale to cover your mortgage during an inevitable market crash.
But, we do have to tension the limits of this concept from the outside, because building that bridge requires materials you might not actually possess.
Fair point.
The entire concept of a margin of safety fundamentally assumes you have an income above the basic survival threshold.
Right.
If you are working 2 jobs and struggling to pay rent, holding cash as a buffer is a luxury. It's not a behavioral choice. It is an economic impossibility. So the framework implicitly requires a baseline of capital privilege.
That's a really important distinction.
And even if you have that privilege, consider the psychological cost of maintaining this posture. Operating what is essentially a split personality where you are endlessly vigilant against ruin while trying to maintain long-term sunny faith, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It requires an immense emotional endurance that the system just sort of assumes the average human can supply indefinitely.
And the entire reason you need that exhausting emotional endurance, the whole point of surviving the short-term paranoia, is to buy yourself the only currency that actually does the heavy lifting in finance.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the second pillar.
Time.
Time. Time is the only real lever you have to activate the mathematical magic of compound interest. Housel points out that the greatest finance book ever written wouldn't be about complex trading strategies or derivatives. It would be a single page with the words, "Shut up and wait," printed in bold, just sitting above a chart of long-term economic growth.
Right. But the human question then becomes, if the math is so reliable, why do we abandon strategies that work? And the answer is that compounding is wildly counterintuitive. Because it operates exponentially, it feels remarkably boring in the short term. Human brains are wired for linear progression, not exponential explosions.
Let's actually break down the math on that to show exactly why it breaks our brains. Take the number 8. If you simply add 8 to itself, 9 times 8 plus 8 plus 8, and so on, you get 72.
Simple enough.
Right. It makes sense. You can visualize it. That is linear thinking. But apply exponential thinking. Take the number 8 and multiply it by itself 9 times, 8 to the 9th power. Suddenly, you aren't at 72. You are at over 134 million.
It's crazy.
Our brains literally cannot conceptualize that leap. So because we can't feel the exponential growth in those early stages, we get bored. We interrupt the compounding. We chase a quick return. We tweak the portfolio. We try to outsmart the market. And every time we intervene, we reset the clock on the one variable that actually matters.
And the mechanism of failure is unnecessary interruption. But look closely at the core assumption beneath that protocol. Housel's system brilliantly manages investor behavior by removing the urge to meddle, but it offers 0 criteria for asset selection.
Oh, that's true.
It delegates the what entirely. It defaults to the assumption that you will simply buy broad passive index funds and sit on your hands. So we have to ask, is shut up and wait an actual robust financial solution, or is it an evasion of the responsibility of asset allocation?
That's a great question.
The entire architecture of behavioral endurance only pays off if the underlying system, meaning the global economy, avoids total permanent collapse.
Yeah.
You are essentially outsourcing your personal risk to the macroeconomic survival of capitalism itself.
You're absolutely trusting that the market will always recover and grow over a long enough timeline. But, why does it actually recover? What is happening under the surface while you sit there passively waiting? That brings us to the third pillar, the reality of returns, which are driven entirely by tail events.
Right.
A tail event is an extreme outlier. It's the far end of a distribution curve. And the foundational reality is that these tiny fractions of events drive absolutely everything. You can be wrong 50% of the time or even more and still make an absolute fortune.
Heinz Berggrun's art collection is the perfect encapsulation of this mechanism.
Oh, I love this story.
It's so good. Berggruen amassed one of the greatest art collections of the 20th century. People thought he possessed this flawless eye for talent.
Right, like he was a genius.
Exactly, but it wasn't. He simply bought massive amounts of art across his entire lifetime. 99% of what he purchased turned out to be complete duds of very little value. But the 1% were masterpieces by Picasso and Matisse.
Why?
He didn't need a high batting average. He just needed a massive volume of attempts to ensure he captured a few extreme tail events. Those outliers rendered the thousands of losses completely irrelevant.
And this exact same mechanism governs the stock market. You buy a broad index fund, and over a few decades, 40% of the companies in that fund might stagnate or fail entirely. But the massive exponential success of a tiny fraction, the Apples, the Amazons, the massive winners, that tiny fraction generates almost all the returns of the entire S&P 500, which raises a massive behavioral question for you, the listener. If the game is won by holding on long enough to capture a few rare exponential winners, why do we constantly panic and trade?
Because we imitate people who aren't playing our game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We look at the market and we only see the tail events. We see the overnight crypto billionaires, the massive short squeezes. We see the result, but we blind ourselves to the timeline and the massive graveyard of duds behind it.
We lose our sense of identity in the market. A long-term retirement investor starts reading the daily maneuvers of a highly leveraged day trader and basically begins copying them.
It's absurd when you map it to the real world. Think about it. If you're driving a minivan to drop your kids off at school, you don't aggressively weave through traffic and draft behind semi-trucks just because you watch Formula One racing on Sunday.
Right.
You know you are playing a different game with different equipment and completely different stakes. But in finance, we forget our vehicle. We apply short-term tactical maneuvers to a long-term strategy, and the result is just a catastrophic collision. You end up panic selling your retirement fund during a dip because you're mimicking the anxiety of a trader whose literal financial survival depends on today's liquidity.
Well, and the reliance on tail events introduces a really fascinating tension when we compare Morgan Housel to someone like Nassim Taleb.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, both of these thinkers construct their entire worldview around the reality of tail events. They agree that extreme outliers rule the world. However, their operational mechanics for dealing with that reality differ wildly. Taleb advocates for what he calls the barbell strategy.
So wait, if I'm picturing a barbell, the weight is evenly distributed on both sides. Does that mean balancing your portfolio perfectly down the middle?
Actually, the exact opposite. Imagine a physical weightlifting barbell. You have incredibly heavy weights clustered at the extreme ends and absolutely nothing on the bar in the middle.
Okay, I see.
In finance, Taleb's barbell means putting 90% of your capital in hyper-safe, boring assets like treasury bills and the remaining 10% in hyper-risky, maximum upside bets like venture capital or out-of-the-money options.
Wow.
You completely avoid the middle ground of moderate risk. It is an active posture. You are aggressively positioning yourself to harvest tail events. Housel, conversely, proposes a posture of passive endurance. He suggests that if you just survive, hold a broad enough portfolio, and refuse to interrupt compounding, the tail events will naturally emerge within the index and do the work for you.
That's fascinating. They're looking at the exact same math, but prescribing entirely different behaviors. Taleb requires active vigilance, assuming you can at least identify the arenas where the massive tails might occur, whereas Housel requires an almost religious level of passive faith. He believes the broad market will naturally capture enough of those tails to offset the inevitable losses. But if that passive premise fails, like if the index stagnates for 30 years, Housel's strategy fails.
Which forces us to ask what the ultimate point of capturing those returns actually is.
Right.
What is the end game of surviving the paranoia, waiting out the compounding, and capturing the tail events?
And that question leads us right into the final pillar: temporal autonomy, control over your time. And to get there, the framework flips the definition of wealth completely on its head. True wealth is what you don't see.
Right.
It is the first-class upgrade you declined. It is the luxury car you didn't buy, the expensive watch you chose not to wear. We tend to judge wealth by what we can see, but visible consumption is just evidence of money that has been spent.
This redefinition completely alters the mechanics of savings. Savings is no longer a strict mathematical percentage of your salary that you just lock away in a spreadsheet. Savings is the gap between your ego and your income.
Let that idea really sink in. Like, look at your own paychecks over the last 10 years. Why doesn't our savings rate explode when our salaries double or triple? It's because our ego inflates to perfectly match our new income.
Always.
We get a promotion, and instantly we feel the psychological need to convert that new capital into visible status symbols just to signal to our peers that we've leveled up. But when wealth is redefined as unspent assets, saving transforms, it stops feeling like an act of deprivation where you're denying yourself a treat. Instead, it becomes an act of purchasing future flexibility.
But the danger in planning for that future flexibility is that long-term financial plans frequently end up becoming prisons of their own making.
Oh, how so?
Well, there's a psychological concept called the end of history illusion. It was coined by the psychologist Dan Gilbert. We possess this strange cognitive bias where we can easily look back and recognize how much our personalities and our desires have changed over the past decade. Yet we falsely assume that the person we are today is the final, finished version of ourselves.
Oh man, that is so true. Think of a 20-something aggressively adhering to the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early.
Yes, perfect example.
They are saving 90% of their income, they're eating ramen, never traveling, living a totally austere life so they can retire at 35. They are locking their future self into a rigid blueprint that a 50-year-old version of themselves might bitterly resent.
Exactly.
The 50-year-old might look back and realize they sacrificed the best, most energetic years of their life, wishing they had spent just a little money to actually experience their youth.
And we must deeply examine the failure conditions of this pursuit of temporal autonomy, especially within its environmental context. Because the framework dictates that the highest and best use of money is to buy invisible freedom, to buy control over your calendar.
Right.
But applying this requires decoupling your ego from your income in a capitalist society, literally engineered to prevent you from doing exactly that.
Right, yeah.
The entire modern consumer ecosystem is meticulously designed to weaponize status anxiety. It demands visible consumption. It is built on the premise of fake it until you make it.
Literally every advertisement, every social media feed is a mechanism designed to close that gap between your income and your ego.
Precisely. Therefore, the behavioral system Housel proposes demands a level of ascetic detachment that borders on the monastic. Can modern humans actually suppress their biologically driven, socially reinforced ego enough to consistently buy invisible freedom over visible status? The framework functions beautifully in theory, and the math is undeniable, but it relies on a psychological fortitude that runs entirely counter to the primary incentives of our culture.
Synthesizing this all together, what we're really looking at is a highly complementary view of a brilliant but specialized system. I mean, Housel provides a nearly flawless internal architecture for behavioral resilience. If you can manage the gap between your ego and your income, if you can surrender to the boring magic of compound interest, and if you can build a margin of safety to survive the inevitable crashes, you will protect yourself from the emotional sabotage that ruins so many brilliant minds.
But you must utilize this architecture while maintaining a clear-eyed recognition of its external limits. Acknowledge the requirement of a baseline survival income. Recognize the immense psychological toll of sustaining both short-term paranoia and long-term optimism, and understand its deep reliance on passive, broad-market faith. It is not an invincible shield against all economic reality. It is a highly specialized behavioral tool to govern your own mind.
And the ultimate output of that tool isn't a high score in a bank account. It is freedom. As Housel reminds us, the highest dividend money pays is the ability to wake up every single morning and say, I can do whatever I want today.
Which leaves you with one final, lingering question, specifically regarding that ultimate goal of temporal autonomy. If tomorrow you miraculously hit the exact number for the financial independence you've been chasing, would you actually know what to do with your time? Or have you been using the stressful, all-consuming pursuit of money for years as a convenient excuse to avoid answering that terrifying question?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
If this video was useful, give it a like, subscribe, and share. More systems and frameworks in the next Eudaimanya video.